Hierarchical clustering. Hierarchical clustering is another unsupervised machine learning algorithm which is used to group the unlabeled datasets into a cluster, also known as hierarchical cluster analysis or HCA. Hello everyone, welcome back and a good morning to you all. So let's start this all over. We're going to be starting a new topic of AI Developer Level 3, which is hierarchical clustering. It's another unsupervised machine learning algorithm, and again is used to group the unlabeled datasets into a cluster. Now we assigned each point as separate cluster, and now based on the similarities of clusters, we combine the similar cluster together until we are left with a single cluster. In this way, we are just simply making the hierarchy of the clusters in the form of a tree-shaped structure known as the dendrogram. And that's why it's known as hierarchical clustering. Now the hierarchical clustering, the dendrogram. This is number one point we have over here, where we have six points. The second image is a dendrogram, and the first is just an example to show. So since we have 6 points, and we're going to group the nearest two, which is P6 and P5, and over here, as you can see the red line highlighted, we're going to merge them together, which makes C2. Now, P6, P5, and P4 are all in one group. And after we merged P6 and P5, we also merged with P4. Now we're going to go ahead and cluster P2 and P1. And after clustering P2 and P1 in the same cluster, we're going to go ahead with C3 and P0. Now we have C4, C2, and P3 remaining. Now the nearest one to P3 is C2, so we're going to go ahead and cluster that up. We get C5, and our last cluster is remaining with C4, and when we cluster that all up, our final cluster or the main cluster is C6. Now there are two types of hierarchical clustering: agglomerative and divisive. The agglomerative hierarchical clustering is the most common type of hierarchical clustering used to group objects in clusters based on their similarities. It's a bottom to top approach in which the algorithm starts with taking all the data points as a single cluster and merging them together until one cluster is left to form the hierarchy. And in the divisive, it is a top-to-down clustering method where we assign all of the observations to a single cluster and then partition to the cluster to two these similar clusters. So we have one big cluster of many small points in it, and now we make two separate groups. And finally, we proceed recursively on each cluster until there is one cluster for each observation. It is exactly opposite to the agglomerative clustering because in divisive we have one whole cluster instead of many other clusters, and we are slowly grouping them apart like two clusters, three clusters, four clusters till all the points have their own cluster. Now the computation of the distance matrix. There are four different ways to find linkage or distance between clusters in hierarchical clustering. Number one is the complete linkage. The distance between two clusters is defined as the longest distance between 2 points in each cluster. The single linkage is the distance between two clusters is defined as the shortest distance between 2 points in a cluster. In the average linkage, it is the linkage method in which the distance between each pair of data sets is added up and then divided by the total number of data sets to calculate the average distance between two clusters. Now, for the last one is the centroid linkage. It is the linkage method in which the distance between the centroid of the clusters is calculated. Advantages and drawbacks. The advantages and drawbacks. Now, the advantages are that it is easy to decide the number of clusters by merely looking at the dendrogram. We don't have to pre-specify any particular number of clusters. With hierarchical clustering, we can create a more complex shaped clusters that weren't possible with the k-means algorithm. Now the drawbacks that it is a very heavy algorithm or a complex one because you have to keep calculating the distance between data samples, which can increase the computations required. Computations means the computer's power. It's sensitive to noise and outliers, which means missing data. And in this technique, the order of the data has an impact on the final result. So we need to do it carefully and correctly. We're now going to move on to the coding part of this video, which is going to be in the next one. So I'll see you then.